So I just finished up the rebuild on this 4L80 here with the Jake's Performance D3 trans brake. I do have video of the whole rebuild process, but this video is going to be focused on just the trans brake installation steps. If you're interested in the rest of the rebuild, you can check out my 4L80 rebuild playlist that I have on the channel, but let's get started on the trans brake. All right, so I got the transmission laid out and a table for all the parts as they come out. So first thing I'm gonna do is start by taking the pan off. So I have a 10 millimeter for the pan, and the 10 and 8 millimeter is gonna be used for the valve body bolts. I have a 13 millimeter for the pump bolts. I have a T30 Torx and a 3/8 12 point for the fourth drum and the center support. I have a 32 millimeter socket that's going to be used for getting the wire harness plug out. I have a flathead and a pry bar for snap rings. 3/4 inch wrench is going to be used for the lube hole that goes into the center support. There's a fitting on the outside that goes through the center support. And just a 3/8 inch ratchet and impact. We'll start with the 10 mil for the pan bolts. So filter, we're just going to twist, and this will come right out. So valve body bolts are all 10 mil, and then the pressure switch are all 8 millimeter. So we'll go through and get all the 10 mils out. There's one for this lube line right here. There's one under this little lube line. So you actually want to loosen this one, get this little plate out of here. And then you can just wiggle this and this lube line will come out. Then you can get to this other bolt. So we'll get the harness off here first. So there's a clip for the pressure control solenoid. There is a clip for the torque converter lockup. There is a plug for the pressure switch. And then there's one for the two shift solenoids, so solenoid A and solenoid B. So this can just lay over. And then this is where the socket comes in. There's this little tab for the harness. I just push the socket on over the outside and it pushes the little tabs in. These are those little tabs that are on the outside of it. So you basically just push this thing on over the top of it. It pushes the tabs in and allows it to come out. So right now the only thing that's holding the valve body in are the 8 millimeter bolts on that membrane switch, the pressure switch. So I'll take these out, and as I get the last one loose, you'll see the valve body pop up. See it? You heard it pop up there? So you can take these out, and you know exactly where they go because they have the smaller 8 millimeter head. So I just throw them in the pan with the other ones. Take this thing and twist it. You don't want to pull it straight off, or you can rip these things. Now the valve body's ready to come off. Next I'm going to get all the check balls out of there, so I'm going to grab a magnet. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There's 8 check balls there. All right, so next we're gonna take the 3/8 12 point. There's a bolt right here, black one with a hole in it, and that's for your center support. And then that T30 Torx is gonna go right in there. All good. It's actually, I think it's a little bit bigger size than a T30. You'll have to check it out. It might be like a 35 or a 40. So those have to come out, otherwise the fourth drum won't come out and the center support won't come out. So now that I did that, I'm going to go right on the back side here. I'm going to make sure that I take the rear lube fitting out. Otherwise the center support won't come out. So there's your rear lube fitting. Transmission cooler line, the back one. This section here goes inside the center support. So don't forget to take that out or you'll be yanking on it and it won't come out. You can take the reverse servo out. There's a gasket. This thing will twist and come out of there. It's a little tight. Okay, next we got pump bolts. 13 millimeter. And there is a little O-ring on here that you want to take off. It's for the torque converter lockup. So if that's not on there, it won't lock up. But if it is on there, you can't get the pump off. It'll bind on the bushing. So take that little guy, put it on the table, And then what I'm gonna start to do is I'm gonna go inside right here on the back side of the pump and start to pry the pump off. So sometimes you can get a little bit of a grip and start to pry the pump. And then other times, use these little guys sticking out right here and you can get right behind there and pry a little bit. You just kind of work this thing around. Alright, so that should come off. There we go. Now that comes right out. Alright, now we can start yanking this stuff up. So you can grab this whole shaft right here. This whole drum comes out. Just be careful, there's a bearing on the bottom of this. So you're going to want to make sure that stays with this piece. And as you pull it out, just kind of make sure everything stays in the same order. So now this fourth drum will come out. Your forward drum comes out. Your direct drum comes out. And then your band comes out here. And then next we have a snap ring. You can see right there we have a snap ring that comes out, so that's your intermediate snap ring. And that holds in your intermediate clutch pack. And that's needed for second gear. I know that because I just broke this snap ring on a different transmission. This is the snap ring. So I broke that and lost second gear. Now this clutch pack comes out. Next you have a wave plate that didn't come out with it. This is a wave plate. And then you have another snap ring. So this is your beveled, it's called a beveled snap ring. This goes on top of your center support. So they call it the beveled snap ring because there's a little bevel and that goes on the top. So it's flat on the bottom side, beveled on the top. Now your center support port will come out. If this piece doesn't come out, you have either your bolt or your rear lube port still in there. The only real modification that I'm going to be doing here is taking this second ring off. And this modification is going to be for part of the dual feed. Then we'll take these three holes, line them up with the bottom of the case, and we can put the center support down. And if it doesn't come down all the way, I'm just going to take the output shaft here and then rotate it a little bit. And you'll see the center support fall down into position. Three holes are lined up. Now I'm going to go ahead and put the beveled snap ring in. See, there's a flat edge here. Beveled edge goes up. There we go. Make sure it clicks in all the way around. Next we can start working on putting the intermediate clutch pack in. So I'm going to take the factory wave plate and put the wave plate in. This just goes right on top of the center support. And then we can start putting the intermediate clutches in there. Alternate them every other. The first steel is going to go down towards the wave plate, and then the last clutch is going to be facing up, and then the pressure plate will go on the top. Now the pressure plate can go on. Pressure plate does have this long section here that doesn't have any notches in it. That's going to go over in the 9 o'clock position. And there's really only one way that it can go on there. So now that that's in, you can put your intermediate snap ring on. And I would recommend upgrading this snap ring. I've broken the snap ring before and you lose second gear then. And you can just order them individually, even if you Google or go on Amazon and type in 4L80 heavy duty snap ring. You'll find thicker versions. This is the same thing as installing the other snap rings. Make sure it goes down, engages all the way around. Now your intermediates are done. I will go through the direct drum here, pull the snap ring out. Pretty easy. And then you can pull these out like this, or you can just dump them into your hand. So just dumped it out. Next step, I'm going to be working on the direct drums, getting the springs and the pistons out. This time I'm using a press. I do have a budget way to do this that I showed in a previous video right here. Just using some simple wood clamps and getting the job done. But as I've done these transmissions more and more, I went out and bought the press just because it's a little bit more convenient. It's not as much of a struggle. But the clamp method works well enough if you're just going to do it one time and be done with it. Thing, you have a spring set. And and then the piston comes out. So this one's marked direct on the bottom. We're going to be dual feeding this transmission, so I'm going to take this lip seal right out right away. Don't need that guy where we're going. Next, we're gonna drill the relief hole down in this section here. What I like to do is look on the back where you have this little machined line for balancing, and I'll pick one of those spots because it's a little bit thinner, and that's where I'm gonna drill my hole through. I'm using a 60,000th drill bit, so it's really small. Be really careful, don't break the thing, don't snap it off inside the drum. Now I have the hole there. Now we can work on the assembly of the drum. So this lip seal is taken out because it's part of the dual feed mod. So it basically is filling here and here. You take the seal out. It applies fluid on the entire piston, where the normal apply is divided by the lip seal. So when you take that out, it applies on the whole piston, so you get more clamping force. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take some assembly lube and put it on the lip seal, and we'll put some inside the drum. There's actually still some fluid inside the drum, or some film from fluid, so it should be pretty decent. Put some on the inner lip seal also, and then we can drop the piston into the drum. So I'm just going to use a feeler gauge, and I'm just going to go around the lip seal and tuck the lip seal in so we can drop the piston down. There we go. Now the piston just dropped right in. Next I'm going to go ahead and put the springs on, so I'll take the spring assembly over to the press, put it on over the piston, press it down, and put the snap ring on. Oh, actually, I just got it by hand. Look at that. Alright, so direct drum. And you can see this ring around the wave plate is what goes on the piston. So I'm going to put that in first. And then I'm going to do steel, clutch, steel, clutch, steel, clutch, steel, clutch, steel. Just keep repeating that till we get them all in there. Let's go. All right. So you have a clutch on the top, and then pressure plate goes on, and then snap ring goes on. So we'll go ahead and put our band in next. I did just put some fluid on it before I put it in. For good measure, I'll go ahead and throw the direct drum in. There we go. Now the forward drum can go back in. Make sure my bearing is on, or a thrust washer if you're using a thrust washer. Go. That guy drops in pretty easy. You can put the overrun drum in. Okay, so I'm going to be working on the pump modifications for the Jake's D3 brake. Jake's kit does come with a new spring and also recommends drilling the line to lube hole. So essentially you have a line pressure cavity, and then this is your converter charge pressure, converter feed cavity. So drilling a hole between the two helps the converter charge pressure, like when you have high line pressure. And it also helps bleed the pressure off from the converter so it doesn't drag. So some of the triple disc converters will actually drag a little bit at idle and stuff, and you can get some surging. So it's also known as the line to lube mod, and there's a valve that you can do if you don't want to do the drilling. There's a valve you can put in, a Sonex valve. Basically, he just has a hole and a cavity inside the valve, and it bleeds pressure back and forth. Or you could machine a flat spot onto the valve, but I'm just going to drill a hole. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the valve and everything out. So I did remove the snap ring already from this section. If you're looking at the pump, this is basically the bottom of the case side. Remove the snap ring, and then you can pull this stuff out. You just use a magnet. Then you can pull the boost valve out. So I'm going to catch this, because you're going to have a washer and then two springs, and you don't even really need to take the valve out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the small spring, I'm going to get rid of it. I'm going to take the big spring, put the small spring back inside of it. I'll take the spring, put it back together, take the washer, put it over the spring, Then we can put the boost valve back in. So this is going to be a little bit tricky, but you'll figure it out. I usually just use the snap ring pliers and push down on it as I'm putting the snap ring in, and it goes pretty good. There we go. So now that that's all done, I'm going to stuff this thing with towel, both the channels, and then I'll drill the hole. All right, so I did spin this around now. So this is on the opposite side, just for ease of drilling. I'm using a 93 thousandths drill bit, 0.093. Put some grease on the end and then some tape here. So the tape is just so I can rest it against the pump body, but I still have some room on the end to actually drill the hole. And the grease is just to catch any other shavings. So I'm just gonna go in at a really shallow angle and then start drilling. There we go. So I didn't even really need the tape. I nicked it a little bit, but not a bad idea to put some on there just so you don't scuff the pump up. I'm just gonna do my best to get all this stuff out of here. I might end up actually having to pull it apart and clean this thing, but we'll see what it looks like. So that did actually work pretty well. I was able to get it really clean. So I'm gonna go ahead and put the pump back together now. Just wipe any other crap off of here. So I'm just gonna kind of eyeball where I need to be. So there's the converter charge hole here. So at least I kind of have some idea of where to put this. So one thing I wanted to mention too, taking the pump apart, when you put the pump gear back in there, there's this little notch in the back of the ring. So this flat spot, so the flat spot needs to be here towards the back. If it's opposite direction, you won't be able to get the torque converter in there because the flat spot will hit here. So make sure that that's right. That's got to go towards the back. We can flip this over the top, get our holes lined up. This little splash shield has to go in this side here with this hole. There's a little hole that the shield goes in when it goes through the bolt hole. Make sure that goes on. I've put them together without them on before because it seems to be a part that people don't really focus on, and then when they're done they find it on the table or on the floor somewhere. So I'm going to get these started by hand and line it up with my fingers as best I can. There is actually a tool that should be used to line these up, but I'm just going to wing it. Alright, now I'm going to put the pump on. I'm going to go ahead and torque all these to 18 foot-pounds. I'll go ahead and put my center support bolt in and then the fourth drum bolt. Alright, so next we're going to take the reverse servo, take the 1-2 accumulator piston out, and we're going to take these two seals off. We don't need those, it's part of the trans brake kit. We are going to keep this seal on though. This is for reverse and you need that for the trans brake. Now the instructions recommend disassembling this whole thing so we can test the travel. So there's a little clip on the back side there, so we're going to push that clip off. Right, so I did disassemble the spring. I took this spring off of it, and there's like a little spacer section up here, and put it back together. Just for the sake of this test, I did take this seal off. I am going to be replacing it with a new seal, so it needed to come off anyways. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this all the way in the bore, and I'm going to look for this spot to be flush. So this is in at an angle like this. So this is going to be the highest point. I want to push this into the bore to where it's flush with the case. And then I want to spin the output shaft. Output shaft should spin freely. And then I want to feel resistance as soon as it starts to get pushed into the bore. So watch, I'm spinning freely. And then as I start to push it down, it stops it. So I mean, I can still pull on it really hard, but as you start to push it in, it doesn't travel that far before you see resistance there. So twisting, now it's already starting to be tight. And instructions say about 50 thousandths travel, and that looks like probably about 50 thousandths. So see, I come up, now it's loose, down it's tight, so that looks pretty good. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put the new seal on right away, so we don't forget that. New seal's on. Now I'm going to go ahead and put the spring assembly back together, and then we should be able to put the servo cover on. Now putting the pin back together, get this little cap. This goes on here, then spring, and that little spacer goes inside this spring, and then that goes into the cover, just like this. Put the accumulator piston and the spring back in. I drop this back in the hole. Then I'll put the gasket on. I'm just going to push down, get this thing in there. I'll throw the gasket on and the cover. The front band servo in. Alright, so I got the check balls already installed. There's one check ball, 2, 3, and 4. So those are in. Now valve body's ready to go back on. So let's do that. Alright, so moving on to the valve body here. Take all 4 solenoids that come with the kit. 2 of them are going to come up here. You'll be able to tell because these ends are cut off. And they take the same plug. These are both the same plug. Then you have your shift solenoids down here. They take a different type of plug. And the length is different here, so you can't accidentally swap these. I did put the torque converter solenoid in. And next we got to take the EPC solenoid, and we're going to take these 2 little filters off here, and then we're going to grind a flat spot into the center section. And it'll look something like that. I just use a needle nose and then crack the filters off, and then bench grinder, flat spot. All right, next we'll take the harness that comes with it. So this one has the red and black wires, and then these plugs can go in either solenoid. They're just split like this. So one gets a positive. So one positive goes to both solenoids, one ground goes to both solenoids. So we're going to flip this thing up this way. One other thing I did do was use some assembly lube on the gasket, just so I can flip it over and it's not going to fall off. I also did take the separator plate off, and I double checked the holes. It's an aftermarket separator plate with factory gaskets, so I just wanted to make sure that all of the holes were punched in the gasket that needed to be. I also did take the manual valve out of the old valve body, put that in here, and I'm going to make sure that the manual valve is in the selector, just like putting a normal valve body back on. I'll go ahead and start putting some of the bolts in. Alright, so I got all the valve body bolts down. I did put the pressure switch on and a new wire harness in there. I have these wires coming out to the side. This is going to be to activate the trans brake. And the EPC solenoid we're just going to leave unplugged. So you can just kind of set this off here. Torque converter solenoid is plugged in. A and B solenoids are plugged in. I got the lube port back on. Manual valve is in the selector. Detent is holding the selector down. Alright, so now we can get into the actual wiring portion of the trans brake. So the 2 wires that are coming off your solenoids, you have a red and a black. What I did, I took the red, and that's what's going to go to my plug on the case, and then I took my black and then I grounded it to the valve body. Polarity doesn't matter, so you can do either way. I just did black as ground and red to the plug because I'm going to give it a positive to activate the trans brake. Now I'm going to do it with just running 1 wire through the connector, but you could run both wires through the connector if you wanted to, and then you could make the decisions outside of the case. Remove the large connector from the side of the case using the 32mm socket or something to push that plug out, and then you're going to have to separate the green insert from the plug. There's going to be 1 little clip on the side of the gray connector. Lift that up and then you should be able to get the insert out of the plug. On the back side of the green insert, you're going to want to drill a 1/16 hole. There's basically a line of open pin spots that could be used if you drill a hole. So what I did here was I just went all the way to the opposite side of that row, drilled the hole there, and then put some RTV on the back of it so when I put it back together it doesn't leak fluid. Before we put it back together, you can take the remaining wire from the solenoids and run it into the plug. Again, I grounded one wire to the case, and then this is the wire that's going to be going through. So this is the wire that I put in. Pinned it in the connector as shown, and then put the green insert back into the main gray plug. It did push a little bit of RTV through the holes with the pins, so I just made sure that I went through and cleaned off the RTV from the pins so I don't have any connection issues. Next, you're going to take the A pin on the red plug for the pressure switch. In my pictures, it's showing as purple because it's a new harness. A factory harness is going to be a pink wire, but just make sure you are using the A plug. It's on the left side, and it's the same side that has the little notch in it. So this wire is going to be used to tee into the pressure switch that's on the side of the valve body. So I used a female spade terminal. I crimped and heat shrinked the spade terminal on, and then I slid it over onto the pressure switch, and the pressure switch actually has a little dimple in the center of it. So I used a punch, and I punched the center of the spade terminal so it's actually locked onto the pressure switch and it won't come off. It'll rotate, but it won't actually get pulled off. So I took that black wire here and then I ran it over, and that's going to be teed into the purple wire, the A wire. What I did, I just used a little barrel crimp so you can see the purple and the black wire on one side going into the barrel crimp, and then it connects back into the A wire. And then I pulled the heat shrink over and heat shrink that wire. I also went ahead and put the split loom that came on that section of the harness back over the wiring and the heat shrink. So I said it earlier in the video, the wiring for the EPC solenoid is not going to be hooked up. If you have controller issues like you're running a stock computer and it's throwing codes, you could leave a dummy EPC solenoid plugged in and just hanging in the pan. And that's pretty much that. So put the filter back on, put the oil pan back on. You will also have to go through and add another pin to the harness side of the connector, the one that's on your wire harness that goes to the outside of the case on the transmission. You will have to disassemble that connector and add a wire for that one. That's what's going to trigger the trans brake. So that's it for this one. Hopefully that helped you out. Have a wonderful night.